Hi, my name is Basil Leonard. I am a Professor of Leadership here at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and I have today come to present to you one of our We Read For You, which is part of the University of Stellenbosch Executive Development programs. The book that I have looked at in particular is Conversations with My Sons and Daughters by Mamphela Ramphele. Just to give you one little insight into it, I think in reading the book you will find that very many times when we are critical of things, we are perhaps superficially so. By reading this book, I think you get a depth of understanding so that if you are going to be critical, for example, of the government, at least understand why. And perhaps the second thing that is very strongly emphasized is, why have we moved with our practices away from the values that we espouse as a government in our Constitution? An edited version of my presentation follows after this. Now the book starts with a Sepedi idiom. And what that is, she encountered this young man and she calls him a young professional in 2011. And that's how he greets her. Now, for the majority of us, if we were greeted like that, it would have meant nothing. She, of course, understood fully what it means, because it really means the soil has been stolen. This is used as a call to action to defend the land following the assassination of a king by a conquering power. And all able-bodied men would now be expected to prepare to avenge the outrage and reclaim the land from the usurpers. Just that one phrase there. And so, of course, immediately he has her attention. Because what worries her now is what's going on in his thinking, what's going on in his heart, what's going on in his mind, that he greets me with such a heavy expression. So this is really a declaration of war, and here's what the book is really all about. So please hear this. On the failings of the South African governance and the South African government since the Mandela presidency. Why would this idiom be used by a young South African in 2011? And she states that not even memories of the inspirational leadership of the iconic Nelson Mandela can hide the growing sense of disappointment that the dream of freedom is yet to be reflected in the everyday lives of the majority of the population. So after more than a decade and a half of transition to democracy, cracks are showing in the system of governance that threaten, here it comes, the idealism on which the society reinvented itself. Now some of us, and even if I look at all of us in this room, I think we may all be looking at this from different perspectives. The whole idea of freedom would mean more to some than perhaps to others. Governance is understood as the experience of authority with three basic dimensions. First of all, the political. And this is measured through indicators for democratic accountability, political stability, and the absence of major conflict and violence in society. In the economic dimension, the book says this reflects government effectiveness and the quality of the regulatory framework and its execution. And then the third, the institutional dimension. And this refers to matters pertaining to the rule of law, the control of corruption, and the strength of public institutions that underpin good order. And so, over the last decade or so, South Africa has been showing signs of decline, she says, in its performance as a well-governed country. She says we need to now go and look, where is this decline? What is going on? And this almost sounds like I just showed you News 24. Isn't it amazing? And I mean, we're already in 2013. Rising corruption, weakening of state and civil society institutions, poor economic management, skills and capital flight, politics dominated by short-termism, ethnicity, factionalism, lack of maintenance of infrastructure and standards of service. So according to her then, the most disquieting overall finding is that by the National Planning Commission is that poverty and inequality persists. Why is this? And she then gives us 4 reasons why she thinks this is. And I think this is why I would recommend that you read the book. The first she speaks of is the quality of education for poor South Africans. And then she says, the key reason for this dysfunction in 80% of our schools is because we have teachers who are often not in the class. Or listen to the next one, not well prepared to teach, not competent to use the relevant teaching aids. She goes to the second one. She says too few South Africans have employment. The third reason she refers to is poorly located and inadequate infrastructure. And again, I'm sure when we look at that, we may also be looking at it from different angles. But now think of this young man, remember? This is written because of a comment from a certain young man, and from where he looks and has this discussion with her, that is the finding. She also talks about the high levels of crime and insecurity, again, especially amongst poor people who remain excluded from the benefits of basic public services. So, a major question then, are we really facing a major national crisis? Here is one of the things that she is really, really concerned about. She says, what are we? Are we the actual citizens of the country? Or are we simply the subjects? Because if we're the citizens, then maybe we should actually be taking charge then. If you're just the subject of, then obviously we can understand why you're just allowing this to happen to you. Now she then gives this young man a name, and she calls him Matomi. And now you need to see a little bit about him so that you can see, as I said earlier, who is she really addressing. She says he has worked hard to qualify as a financial analyst with one of the major companies in the country. He is a committed patriot who has been watching the slide of our society into poor governance, growing social ills such as crime and insecurity, and unemployment, especially among young people, including those with higher education qualifications. The bright future, she says, he saw so clearly 10 years ago is becoming dimmer and dimmer. So they see the dream of a prosperous society united in its diversity in a dynamic democratic order vanishing with the revelation of each new scandal that makes previous ones look minor. I wanted to show you what the book actually looks like. 9 chapters. And in each of the chapters, you can even see through the chosen titles that she's given them, how I believe they have been carefully chosen. First, shifting the ground of reason. A lot of that is what I've explained now. And then I think a brilliant, absolutely brilliant chapter. How do you negotiate culture, traditions, and customs in a democracy? I personally would like to think that if you buy the book, why don't you just start with chapter 3? Read the introduction and really go to chapter 3. You see, when we come to values, the big issue, and I think sometimes we forget this, we all have our personal values, but now we're talking as a country. So now whose values are we talking about now? How do then the agreed values cascade into our governance practices? So let's go back to chapter 3, and she says, but hang on, a lot of those values are actually captured in the Constitution. So there, she does a very good job of now saying, let's look at the different aspects of the Constitution that we've agreed to, and let's now go and look at what are the practices we are observing every day as we live in this country. And then chapter 5, a major, major concern, the failure to transform the socio-economic landscape. A lot of these experiences that she enunciates in the book, the young people she's now addressing them to would not have experienced themselves, you see. And then in chapter 6, this betrayal of the future generations is this whole idea that the people that are put in power is actually put in power for a very specific reason. And that reason is to improve the situation for those who are still coming. And then the thing I raised earlier, which I think is absolutely a crucial question, are we subjects or are we citizens? And then this experiments in addressing social pain. And then I like that last chapter, of course, leadership for completing the transition. Unless the correct leadership steps to the front, to the fore, things are not actually going to get better. And this is the theme on which Ramphele is as convincing and compelling as readers might hope. After all, she is uniquely placed to speak truth to South Africa's powers that be. So a way in which she then continues the conversation is by revisiting then some key issues. What then are the values of our national constitution? Why are there such large gaps between values and practice? How does a society rebirth itself? What would a transformational journey, and she looks at least 3 areas, generational, political, and socio-economic, look like? It really touches on everything. So there are issues that I hadn't been au fait with until I read the book, but she really takes you through everything. The electoral system, the difficulties of mother tongue education, Malema, youth unemployment, problematic heroic nature of South African politics, everything is there. I'd like to read something from Shifting the Ground of Reason. She says, our cross-generational engagement through the conversations this book introduces is aimed at reminding you, the generation who will be the leaders in the 21st century, of your rich heritage, and to urge you to take ownership of shaping the future of our great country. She says, shifting the ground of reason has to start with clarity about what our shared values are. She says, the question that stares us in the face is, why have there been such systemic failures in aligning our system of governance and its performance with the values set out in our Constitution? Are we simply another example of the inability of Africa's post-colonial governments to transcend the legacy of the past? She says, my view is that we have fallen prey to 2 fatal flaws. We have fallen into the trap of heroic politics, with the ANC governing as a liberation movement that has not transformed itself into a modern political party. She says, there's the first one. And then she says, secondly, we have failed to tackle the challenges of systemic restructuring of the economy to lay the foundation for progressive realization of socio-economic rights and inclusive prosperity. She says the ANC political machinery has become adept at playing victim of apartheid and not taking responsibility for its failures. This has become the reason for failure to transform apartheid socio-economic inequities and for the poor performance of successive post-apartheid administrations in measures to eradicate poverty.